So let me give you a few pointers of the nuts and bolts of what I've learned over the years. You define a problem, or you make a clinical observation, and oftentimes it can be from a single patient or even my single in-training board exam. And it bothers you, and you read about it, and you think about it, and then you figure it out. So you have to have a good idea. And some people say, well, that's the rate-limiting step, it's the funnel effect, but we all have great ideas, and it's really just a question of pursuing them. So my strategy for all of this was to define the problem, and then when you're doing your first paper, plan and prepare your next one. Because by that time, you've developed one question, you've developed many other questions, you're developing hypotheses, and then you're trying to answer several questions. And you just do them sequentially, and before you know it, you've developed your own unifying set of ideas that can really help other patients. Now, the advantage of this type of research is none of this required any intramural or extramural funding. The MRIs and all of that are all done for clinical reason, clinical purpose. The genetic studies are done for fun. You make friends, interesting patients, advances. I'd never have had an NIH grant for this type of research. So let me give you 10 pointers that I've figured out over the years that have helped me with clinical research beginning as a resident. So the first thing is ask good questions and just keep asking why. Why is it always near a joint? Isn't it interesting that the overgrowth was where the nerve lesion was? Isn't it interesting that that sciatic nerve prostate cancer was in the same region as the positive prostate cancer biopsy on the right side? Then figure out how to find the answers. Now you have to own the literature, because in order to understand that there are patterns, you need to understand that other people have written about it, made similar observations. Now the key is not to believe everything you write, because again, people may not appreciate all the subtleties of MRIs. They may say that there's no joint connection, that there's no connection to the prostate. But the point is that you still can see their scans and make their observations relevant. Now you have to have a good mentor. I've been blessed with several. So Dr. Klein and Stephen Carmichael, one of my clinical anatomists, my first anatomy teacher. Make friends through science. Team science is really the easiest way. Figure out how to do your studies scientifically so that they can stand up over time. Work hard on your manuscript. So, revision number 100. Every word is important. Now, I learned this from Zia Gokaslan. I think the power of aesthetics. You want figures that make sense to people, not just your colleagues, but to laymen. So here are just some examples of covers over the years of either the breast cancer mechanism, which follows the same example as the pelvic one. The breast cancer comes from breast nerves. It just doesn't happen that it gets into the brachial plexus, and here it's often mislabeled as radiation, but it's cancer and it needs to be treated. And here is my version of Hilton's Law 100 years later. Peer review is very helpful. Take the reviewers seriously and think about their questions that they answer and that they ask, and try to take them to the next level. And develop a niche. Mine is peripheral nerve. That's what I enjoy, so this is what I think about. And that's how you get the referrals for the interesting cases that start this process. So what I would say is the key words over my years have been curiosity, creativity, passion, innovation, a little bit of compulsion, tenacity, and then when you're putting things together, simplicity, and maybe even a little bit of fearlessness, because you're going to have people who doubt you. So what I've shown through several different examples is how some simple ideas, making an observation on a single patient with a single question, forms a hypothesis that you then test. You propose a theory, you challenge it, you generalize, you translate, you prove it, and then it becomes a law. Now, case reports. I will tell you that my favorite paper was the one of the prostate cancer. It got turned down by JNS because John Jane wrote back to us and said that it wasn't new, that people had talked about prostate cancer in the sciatic nerve before, so it wasn't novel. And based on that, since we didn't have a cure for it, he would reject it. So Bert Scheitauer, who is a famous pathologist here and a colleague of mine, wrote back to John Jane and said, well, I guess we'll never, ever have another paper on GBMs because, after all, they've been reported before and we don't have a cure for them. And that's the first rejection that turned into an acceptance. So I just wanted to spend a moment talking about the power of one, which is what John Jane would talk about. And the reference is actually from Bill Sweet from MGH, who talked about the difference between 0 and 1. But this is like I'm showing that simple ideas can come from a single case, a single patient, and this is important. So for residents who are listening in, case reports have a value, especially if it's a first observation. So I started this with this E pluribus unum, which is on our quarters and is the motto of New York, and lots of good things are happening with unity. I wanted to just be a little disruptive. I took Latin long enough to understand that the opposite of one out of many is many out of one. I think you're able to unify, like we've done, is if you ask a single question and that turns into many other papers, ideas, and you're still in the same circle, then you've been completely disruptive and you've formed a really nice circle with a contribution. So that's the case report that's turned into sort of 20 years of research in different areas. So I would say that disruptive transformation can start with a single case and it can change history books. So again, don't believe everything you read. Evolution is not very far from revolution, which started with a revelation.